Good morning and welcome to the Florida Small City CDBG Development Block Grant Programs Application Webinar. My name is Sharita Jackson. I am the Deputy Bureau Chief for the Bureau of Small Cities and Rural Communities at Florida Commerce. Joining me today is Graham Mercurian, Lead Supervisor for the CDBG program, and Blake Rockwood, who is also a Supervisor for CDBG. Today, we also have our Bureau Chief, Pam Portwood, here with us.
Thank you, Sharita, and happy Friday, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this webinar. As many of you know, there are some significant changes for the upcoming cycle, and we'll be going over those, as well as providing an overview of the program requirements and guidance regarding application development and submission. We're hopeful that the webinar is informative and helpful in your efforts to prepare and submit an application. And it's our intention to assist and support you in implementing projects that have positive community and economic development impacts. To that end, I encourage you to reach out to the CDBG team to answer any questions or provide technical assistance as you identify specific projects and begin preparing your applications. Thanks again for joining us. And now I'll turn it back over to our CDBG experts. Sharita?
During our presentation today, we will go over completing and submitting the application form, the Small City CDBG program information and funding categories, applicant eligibility, national objectives and eligible activities, potential application rejection issues, citizen participation requirements, fair housing requirements, defining service areas and surveying beneficiaries, procurement of professional services, readiness to proceed requirements, economic development, and the emergency order, which can be found on the CDBG website. After the formal presentation, we will answer questions. Please feel free to enter your questions in the chat feature as we go along. As a reminder, this webinar is recorded and the slides will be made available on the CDBG website. On February 3rd, 2025, Secretary Kelly executed an emergency final order relating to the suspension of statutes and rules in response to Hurricanes Helene and Milton. The order suspends the requirement in Florida statute that limits eligible local governments to have one grant application per application cycle for the Small City CDBG program. The order also suspends the requirement in Florida statute that states eligible local governments with an open housing rehabilitation, neighborhood revitalization, or commercial revitalization contract, that they are not eligible to apply another grant in these categories. Order suspends the requirement in Florida statute that states eligible local governments with an open economic development contract whose activities are on schedule as described in the contract may receive no more than one additional economic development grant in each fiscal year. Additionally, the order suspends the grant funding ceilings requirements set forth in statute and in rule, and the order suspends the self-scoring requirements for applications set forth in rule. The CDBG application cycle will open on March 5th, 2025, and will close May 2nd, 2025 at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. For electronic submission, applicants should email a request to submit electronically to cdbg@commerce.fl.gov no later than May 2nd, 2025. Florida Commerce will reply with instructions for uploading application documents. For mailed applications, applicants should use the address on the slide. Mailed, shipped, or electronic applications must be received by 5 p.m. Eastern Time on May 2nd, 2025. CDBG application resources include the Florida Commerce website, which is shown on this slide. The FFY 2023 eligible communities list, application form downloads and instructions, census data links, Section 8 income limits, and the sample public notices. The application for funding is comprised of 9 separate parts. Please submit only those parts relevant to your application for funding. All applicants must submit a copy of the cover sheet. Neighborhood revitalization applicants must also submit parts 2, 7, 8, and 9. Housing rehabilitation applicants must submit parts 2, 6, 8, and 9. And commercial revitalization applicants must submit parts 2, 4, 8, and 9. Please submit only the relevant appendices from Part 9. If leverage is being claimed for points, Part 3 must also be submitted. Applicants do not need to send a copy of the application to the state clearinghouse. After an applicant is notified that their application is being funded, they are to submit portions of the CDBG application to the clearinghouse for review. The CDBG federal grant program is administered by Florida Commerce through the Small City CDBG program, which provides funding for housing and community development activities. The CDBG program is governed by federal and state regulations, and these are listed on the slide. There are 4 funding categories in the CDBG program. Commercial revitalization. This category includes construction of infrastructure and support of commercial enterprises, including facade improvements, fire hydrants, water and sewer improvements, street and sidewalks, relocation of utilities to underground, open space parks and playgrounds, and the clearance and demolition of vacant or dilapidated buildings. Economic development. This category includes building construction, demolition of vacant and dilapidated buildings, water and sewer improvements, fire protection, flood and drainage, relocation of utilities to underground, rehabilitation of commercial buildings, and loans to non-public entities. Under housing rehabilitation, this category includes clearance and code enforcement, demolition, historic preservation of residential housing, housing rehabilitation or demolition, and replacement of low to moderate income owner-occupied or rental-occupied residential housing units. And neighborhood revitalization. This category includes fire protection and flood and drainage, hazard mitigation activities, and the construction of or improvements to parks and playgrounds, recreation and neighborhood centers, senior centers, water and sewer improvements, sidewalks, street improvements, and health facilities. Eligible applicants include counties with a population in an unincorporated area less than 200,000 and any city, town, or village with a population less than 50,000, no special entitlement status, and they have not opted to join an entitlement program. An entitlement community is a county whose population is 200,000 or more, or a city of 50,000 or more. Such local governments receive their funding allocation directly from HUD on an annual basis. Ineligible applicants include entitlement communities and small communities that opt to participate in an entitlement program. We encourage you to visit floridajobs.org/CDBG applicant info for a list of eligible community applicants. As previously mentioned, the emergency order waived the funding ceilings. However, economic development grants have a job creation requirement that the participating party or job creator will complete at least one new full-time equivalent job for each $34,999 of CDBG funds awarded. Please note that at least 51% of all jobs created must be available to a person from an LMI household. CDBG funded activities must meet at least one of three HUD national objectives. The low to moderate income national objective requires at least 51% of the beneficiaries receiving indirect benefit, such as from road paving, which must be low to moderate income persons. For direct benefit activities, such as housing rehabilitation funded activities, 100% of all beneficiaries must be low to moderate income. Activities funded under the slum and blight national objective may be funded under the commercial revitalization funding category only. Activities funded under the urgent need national objective must address urgent community needs that pose a serious and immediate threat to the health and welfare of the community for which other funding is not available. Eligible infrastructure improvement activities include water and sewer, street and sidewalk paving, flood and drainage, parking lots, natural gas lines and rail spurs, and fire protection. Eligible public facility construction and activities may include, but are not limited to, community centers, temporary shelters, and parks and playgrounds. Direct benefit activities include housing rehabilitation, temporary relocation assistance, and water and sewer hookups. Planning-only grants include water, sewer, and or master utility studies, as well as capital improvement programs. CDBG may be used for studies, analyses, data gathering, and identification of actions that will implement. Final plans must include options and or alternatives. For example, option A is a full project implementation. Option B is a phased implementation. Option C is a critical need only, and option D is a no action alternative. Planning and capacity building activities do not include engineering, architecture, design costs related to a specific project, for example, detailed bid specifications and work drawings, and other costs of implementing plans. Infrastructure planning only grants or activities must comply with the requirement or the low to moderate income national objective. Planning only grants or activities can meet low to moderate income national objective if it can be shown that at least 51% of the persons who would benefit from implementation of the plan are low to moderate income persons. Ineligible activities include general government expenses, buildings for the general conduct of government, political activities, purchase of equipment, with exceptions for economic development projects, fire protection, operating and maintenance expenses, new housing, with some exceptions, and income payments excluding emergency grants. A list of eligible communities, special designations, census data, and scoring data are located on the Commerce website found at floridajobs.org/CDBG applicant info. A list of eligible activities is included in the application form located on the Commerce website as well, floridajobs.org, and the HUD Guide to National Objectives and Eligible Activities, which is updated December 2014, is available at www.hudexchange.info or floridajobs.org. Section 290.0475 Florida statutes governs rejection of applications for funding. The 6 circumstances which will result in the rejection of an application for funding include submitting the application after the deadline, the project does not meet the national objective, the project is not an eligible activity, the application is not consistent with the local government's comprehensive plan, the applicant is not in compliance with the citizen participation requirements, or the information provided in the application that affects eligibility or scoring is found to have been misrepresented. Other potential rejection issues regarding surveying and service area boundaries include random sample survey problems, the service area being drawn improperly, or homes missing from the survey. We have been encountering challenges with applicants failing to meet the necessary citizen participation requirements. In this next portion of the presentation, Blake Rockwood will discuss key aspects of citizen participation requirements. We encourage you to listen attentively and jot down notes and key points.
Thank you, Sharita. 24 CFR 570.486 stipulates that all applicants for funding shall provide for and encourage citizen participation, including low to moderate income citizens that reside in slum or blighted areas and areas in which the CDBG funds will be applied. Applicants must ensure that citizens are given reasonable and timely access to local meetings, information, and recordings related to the proposed and actual use of CDBG funding. Local governments applicants must furnish citizens with public notice and information, which includes but is not limited to the federal fiscal year under which an application will be submitted, including the grant and anticipated program income. Such notice should include the range of activities that may be undertaken, the amount of CDBG funds that are proposed to be used for each proposed activity, and must specify under which national objective the activity or activities will qualify. The notice must state whether the proposed CDBG activities will likely result in displacement and provide reference to the applicant local government's anti-displacement and relocation plan. Public notices conveying the aforementioned information must be advertised in a newspaper of general circulation in the applicant's jurisdiction. In addition, applicants are encouraged to convey public notice using social media, the applicant's local government website, public service announcements, and posters posted in areas frequented by the general public that may be impacted by the proposed activities. The notices should convey enough information so that citizens who may be impacted by the proposed activities will be advised of the likely impact on their lives. The public hearings must be publicly noticed in accordance with the requirements of Rule 73C23, Florida Administrative Code, and be conducted by a member of the applicant's governing body or a duly authorized representative. Local governments are encouraged to offer virtual attendance in addition to attendance in person. Virtual conference call public hearings must provide reasonable notification and access for citizens, timely responses from local officials to all questions issues, public access to all questions and responses, take appropriate actions to encourage the participation of all residents, and roll call for attendance should be taken at the beginning of the event. If a member of the public declines to identify him or herself, that is not to be considered an issue of concern. Allowing public participation through virtual and conference call participation in the public hearings, in addition to in-person attendance, promotes accessibility and provides a convenient opportunity for citizen participation. It is highly recommended that the applicant's official website and social media accounts be used to promote attendance as well. It is critical that local government applicants understand the purpose of the first and second public hearings. During the first public hearing, attendees should be provided with general information regarding the availability of funding through the Florida Commerce Small Cities CDBG program and the types of activities that are allowable and could be undertaken. After that process has occurred, citizens should be invited to speak and offer their views regarding community development needs. The agenda for the first public hearing and the activities undertaken therein must be limited to the bulleted items reflected on this slide. The local government should not take any steps to limit participation from the citizens or input in the public hearing process. The second public hearing is intended to inform the public of the draft application for funding and the proposed CDBG funded activities. The notice must present a brief summary of the draft application, including the federal fiscal year of funding for which the application is being considered, a description of the activities that are proposed to be undertaken, a budget that lists the specific dollar amounts that will be allocated to each proposed CDBG activity. For example, $56,000 for administration, $84,000 for engineering, $880,000 for street improvements, repaving, and $380,000 for water treatment plant improvements. The summary must also include the HUD national objective that will be met by each activity, excluding funds budgeted for administration and engineering. Lastly, the location, including street names or road numbers of the proposed CDBG funded activities for proposed neighborhood and commercial revitalization and economic development projects must be included. The second public hearing notice also must include info such as a link to the website or email address where a copy of the draft application can be obtained and reviewed prior to the date of the public hearing. Information describing where the written comments may be submitted and the deadline for the submission and the date, time, and location of the hearing. If the hearing may be attended virtually or via conference call, information sufficient to facilitate that process must be included in the notice. During the second public hearing, the proposed application is discussed, including planned activities, the specific location of those activities, and the specific budget amounts for those activities. Citizens must be allowed to comment on the proposed application, and their comments must be documented. The application should give consideration to all public comments and modify the application prior to submission if they determine that it is appropriate to do so. Documentation related to both the first and second hearings is required. Such documentation must include proof of publication and a copy of publication from a local newspaper. A copy of the speaker cards or sign-in sheets and or call log documenting those persons in attendance must be provided, and certified copies of the minutes from public meetings must be provided. If certified minutes are not available at the time the application is submitted to Commerce, please include a copy of the draft minutes. Meeting minutes should be on the local government letterhead. As noted in the slide, the requirement to utilize a Citizens Advisory Task Force, CADF, is no longer mandatory. However, if an applicant has appointed and utilized a CADF consistent with program requirements, the application can qualify for up to 10 additional points more than an application that did not do so. A CADF must have at least 5 members, of which at least 3 must be considered LMI. For scoring purposes, a CADF must have a quorum of at least 51% of the appointed members present at the meeting in order to qualify for points. Only one member of the CADF may be an employee of the local government applicant. Elected officials may not serve on the CADF. More than one CADF meeting may be held. If the CADF meeting is conducted prior to the first public meeting, the applicant will receive 10 points. If it meets after the first public meeting, but prior to the second public hearing, the applicant the application will receive 5 points. CADF meetings must be properly noticed in newspaper. Be sure to include meeting minutes, sign-in and/or roll call sheets, and documentation of the public notice in the application. Citizens know their own needs. Advice and participation is essential to the success of the CDBG program. Therefore, the CADF meeting should not be dominated by local government staff. The purpose of the CADF meeting is to receive input from the CADF members and to facilitate discussions regarding their perception of their community needs. Past CDBG applications should not be discussed until after the CADF members have discussed what they see as the community's needs. Failure to meet the fundamental citizen participation requirements reflected on the previous slides is considered threshold and will result in rejection of an application as required per section 290.0475 subsection 6 of the Florida statutes. Applicants may score up to 10 points for outstanding performance in fair housing if they have adopted a fair housing ordinance prior to the application cycle deadline. An additional 5 points may be claimed if the applicant has conducted a fair housing workshop within 12 months of the application deadline. At this time, Graham Markarian, CDBG Program Supervisor, will continue with defining service areas.
Good morning, everybody. We've had a few additional attendees join us. Just to restate a few items from the beginning of this webinar. The webinar is being recorded. You can enter questions in the chat at any time, and we'll make this webinar and the application slides available on our website. So to start our discussion about service areas. So this slide has an overview of the process to define a service area and survey beneficiaries. The first step is to identify the beneficiaries of the proposed activity. The second step is to determine the boundaries of each service area. And the third step is to plot the beneficiaries and the proposed activities on a service area map. Then the applicant will need to develop a project narrative and use either census data or conduct a survey to verify compliance with HUD's national objective. Funded activities that provide benefits on an area basis are described as having an indirect benefit and require the applicant to have a defined service area. Work performed on a public property or to construct an easement is generally considered as providing indirect benefit. Hookups to an individual home are considered to have a direct benefit and are allowed relative to indirect benefit activities such as construction of new water or sewer lines. Service area boundaries are determined based on the beneficiaries of the CDBG construction activity. The work location does not necessarily relate to the beneficiaries themselves. For example, if the CDBG funded activity were improvements to a sewer lift station, which serves dozens of housing units, those housing units may or may not be located near the lift station. Therefore, it's important to take time to consider who the beneficiaries are and how to properly define each service area. At least 51% of all beneficiaries for the CDBG funded construction activities must be low to moderate income persons. When developing a service area, it's critically important to identify the location of the activity using a map and legend indicators. The legend indicators are helpful when determining the beneficiaries for indirect benefit activities such as street work and sewer and water line improvements. The beneficiaries must also be identified on a map, and the service area boundary can then be developed and drawn on the map for context. It's important to remember that multiple activities may require multiple service areas whenever the beneficiaries are not identical for all funded activities. Please note that each service area must benefit at least 51% low to moderate income persons. The service area map is intended to serve as a visual representation of project activities, locations, and beneficiaries. The map must be consistent with the beneficiaries identified in each survey. An improperly drawn map may affect eligibility for funding if not all project beneficiaries were included, or if some beneficiaries were not correctly identified and included. Survey errors may result in a survey being considered invalidated, and the application for funding may need to be rejected for non-compliance with HUD guidelines. The application narrative serves as a textual description of the proposed project and will be compared to the map, which serves again as a visual representation. The narrative description and the map must be consistent with one another. An activity that is not properly represented in the narrative or on the map is not considered to be a part of the proposed project. The service area map governs the CDBG project if the narrative description is not consistent with the visual representation on the map. Generally speaking, all neighborhood revitalization and commercial revitalization activities must be located in the service area. The service area for a commercial revitalization project is normally the entire jurisdiction of a local government. Under certain circumstances, it may be allowable to justify a smaller service area for a commercial revitalization project. Applicants seeking to submit a commercial revitalization application who believe that their proposed project will not necessarily benefit the entire jurisdiction should contact their assigned small city CDBG regional representative to request technical assistance prior to developing and submitting an application for funding. The service area boundaries for housing rehabilitation applications are the corporate limits of the applicant's local government, since housing rehabilitation activities provide direct benefit and all beneficiaries must be low to moderate income persons. Surveys are conducted to establish the benefit to low to moderate income persons within a given service area. Confirming that the benefit to low to moderate income persons is at least 51% or more of the population in that service area. Surveys are also conducted to confirm the total number of beneficiaries and their income characteristics for the purpose of scoring and ranking of applications, and later the reporting of accomplishments to HUD. It's important to note that you must income qualify residents on an area basis. Pursuant to recent HUD guidance, veterans' disability benefits are generally not considered income for CDBG purposes and should be excluded. There are 4 acceptable methods of surveying. Those include the use of census data, using a previously approved survey, conducting a new small area survey, or conducting a new random sample survey. It's important to note that not all prior surveys can be used. In a circumstance where an applicant wants to use a prior survey, it must be something that was previously approved by Florida Commerce and may not be allowable unless it complies with the requirements of certain HUD notices. If you plan to use a previously approved survey to qualify for funding, you should contact your assigned small city CDBG regional representative to request technical assistance prior to submitting an application. Applicants may use the HUD American Community Survey 2020 census data only if the service area corresponds exactly to the entire block groups, tracts, or the jurisdiction's boundaries. The 2016 to 2020 update of the American Community Survey can be accessed online using the links on this slide. This graphic demonstrates how a census tract can be used to reduce the size of a survey that would otherwise have to be conducted. In the example on this slide, the data for census tract 003 can be easily downloaded and combined with the survey data to verify compliance with HUD's national objective requirements. Allowable survey methods include the use of mailouts, telephone interviews, web-based surveys, and any other method that complies with federal, state, and local government guidance or regulations. A small area survey must be conducted when the service area has less than 50 homes and must include 100% of the homes within that service area. Any home that cannot be surveyed must be counted as over income. An example being homes that are occupied but are deemed inaccessible or refuse to respond to the survey. The population of any homes that could not be surveyed should be determined by calculating the average household size of all homes within the service area and considering those as over income. A random sample survey must be conducted consistent with the requirements of 2 HUD notices. Those are HUD Notice CPD-14-013 and CPD-24-04. A confidence level of 95% is recommended, and a confidence level lower than 90% is not allowed. The applicant must use the confidence interval in HUD for the equivalent geographic area contained in the HUD American Community Survey 2020 update. If the census update indicates that the equivalent geographic area had a margin of error of greater than 10%, a margin of error of 10% may be used, but not exceeded. To conduct a random sample survey, applicants must identify the total number of homes in a service area and apply a non-repeating number to each home. The applicant must then randomize the number sequence and survey homes based on the order presented in that random number sequence. That set will serve as the primary sample group, so long as it equates to the total minimum number of samples needed to complete the survey. Applicants must document at least 3 attempts to survey each home included in the primary sample group. In instances where a housing unit identified in the primary group was not accessible, they must document 3 attempts. Once 3 attempts have been documented, the applicant may use an alternate by selecting the next home just outside the primary sample group based on the non-repeating sequence identified. If the required minimum sample size is not achieved using this procedure, it's allowable to begin the survey again. Alternatively, if an applicant does not want to reconduct a survey, they may consider a non-responsive home as over-income. This slide lists various online resources that may be accessed to facilitate the survey process and are compliant with program requirements. We'll leave it up for just a moment. A sample calculator should be used to determine the minimum number of necessary surveys and can be found on the website noted on this slide. Random.org provides a random sequence generator that produces a non-repeating list of random numbers equal to the total number of residential housing units located within a service area. This slide depicts an example of a randomly generated non-repeating list. A copy of this list must be submitted with your application in order to demonstrate compliance with program requirements for conducting a survey. Applicants should use Form SC-49, Household Income Certification Form, or an equivalent form when conducting a survey. The form has 2 sides to it, and both sides must be completed and signed by the interviewer. As noted on the slide, a copy of that form is available on our website. The random sample survey results must be summarized, showing the total beneficiaries, as well as the total moderate income, low income, and very low income beneficiaries. It's recommended that applicants use a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet or similar software to summarize the data. The survey data must be used to calculate the percentage of the low to moderate income benefit for each service area. The confidence interval must be subtracted from the LMI percentage developed through the survey to verify that the resulting LMI percentage is 51% or more, accounting for error. If the adjusted LMI percentage is less than 51%, the service area may not qualify under HUD's LMI national objective. If the adjusted percentage equals 51% or more, the service area does qualify. However, the applicant should always use the unadjusted low to moderate income and very low income percentages when scoring an application. This slide demonstrates the summary of survey results discussed on the prior slide. You can see example 1, which depicts a survey result exceeding 51% after reducing by the confidence interval, showing that it's still over 51% and therefore eligible for funding. In example 2, you'll see a survey result showing that it is less than 51% after reducing by the confidence interval. Therefore, that activity is not eligible for funding. Many as 3 different maps are required to submit an application for funding. Neighborhood revitalization, commercial revitalization, and economic development applications must include a jurisdiction map, a service area and/or project area maps, and floodplain maps. Legends representing housing units on each service area map must be color-coded to depict economic status. For example, over income, moderate income, low income, and very low income. All proposed CDBG funded activities must be represented on the service area or project area map using color-coded legend indicators. Housing rehabilitation applications only require two maps. That's a jurisdictional map and floodplain maps. Neighborhood and commercial revitalization applications must include a narrative description of how the service area was determined, as well as any survey methodology used. Additionally, a copy of the randomly generated non-repeating list of homes used for a survey must also be included in the application. Examples of common random sample survey problems include when the primary sample was not randomly selected, when alternate houses were not randomly selected, or if beneficiaries were left out or wrongly included in a service area. An example of a service area being improperly drawn includes when an application requests funds for, let's say, upgrades to a city water treatment plant. In this case, city limits are shown as the service area's border. However, not all city residents are connected to the water system, and often some homes located outside of city limits are served by the water system. In this case, the survey should include all the homes that are actually serviced by the city's water treatment plant. If homes are missing or omitted, we may not be able to determine that the project will meet a national objective, which may result in the rejection of the application. And now I'm going to hand our presentation back to Blake to discuss procurement of professional services.
Thank you, Graham. If CDBG funds are used to pay the cost of professional services, the procurement process must comply with the federal code, state statutes, and certain sections of the Florida Administrative Code referenced on this slide. If the applicant is not using CDBG funds to pay for professional services, compliance is not required, and Florida Commerce does not review the procurement. A separate procurement is needed for each service on each CDBG grant. For example, application preparation, project administration, and engineering design and construction inspection services are considered separate procurements. Please note that HUD issued a ruling that if inspection services were not listed in the request for proposals for engineering services procured before submitting the application to get readiness to proceed points, then the inspection services must be procured by a new request for proposals. Florida Commerce cannot approve a design firm for inspection services unless inspection services were listed in the request for proposals. Per 2 CFR 200.320, there are 5 basic types of procurements: micro purchases, small purchases, competitive bids, competitive negotiation, and non-competitive. The local government staff should take the time to read and become familiar with their CDBG procurement policy to ensure compliance with program requirements. The request for proposals must be advertised in a nearby metropolitan statistical area, or at least 3 responsible and responsive proposals must be received. The request for proposals can now be published on the county website where each local government is geographically located, so long as the website is accessible to individuals with disabilities and provides meaningful access for individuals with limited English proficiency. The request for proposals must be published at least 12 days prior to the bid close date, not including the date of advertisement. The RFP must include the evaluation criteria, and a separate evaluation and ranking must be undertaken for separate services. Advertisements shall include a CDBG identifier such as the funding cycle or CDBG contract number. Section 287.055 Florida Statutes, otherwise known as the Consultants Competitive Negotiation Act, governs the procurement of professional services such as engineers and architects. The statute applies to design build contracts and construction manager contracts but not contracts for administrative supportive services. Per Section 287.055 Florida statute, covered consultant proposals must be evaluated and ranked based on qualifications. It is unallowable to solicit price information prior to beginning negotiations for such. If the local government cannot reach an agreement on a mutually agreeable fee for services, that firm must be rejected and initiate negotiations with the next highest ranked applicant. They cannot return to a firm after ending negotiations and moving on to the next highest ranked firm. If the local government reaches an agreement regarding the cost of services, a detailed cost analysis must be conducted. A detailed cost analysis is one that breaks out direct costs, such as the cost of salaries and benefits, as well as indirect costs, and the cost of additional engineering services. The detailed cost analysis must list profit as a separate line item. Profit may not be loaded into the negotiated rates to be paid for salaries and benefits. The local government must employ procedures that encourage competition. Procurements that employ procedures that undermine competition will be rejected by Commerce. Commerce will review the public notice to ensure compliance with federal code, state statutes, and administrative code. The evaluation criteria must have been available to all proposers either by including them in the advertisement or embedded in the request for proposals. Florida Commerce recommends that local governments provide training to the evaluators before they review and score proposals. Evaluators must use the published evaluation criteria, which may not be altered after advertisement. If Commerce identifies any issues related to the procurement, they must be resolved before Commerce can approve the procurement. Remember, evaluation factors must be relevant to the work to be performed, and they must be measurable. Price must be a factor when soliciting proposals for administrative services, but not for engineering or architectural services. The ranking procedure used by the local government must be applied consistently for all proposals being reviewed. Local governments should be given consideration to whether or not the procedures being used may be subject to manipulation and take appropriate action if needed. Florida Commerce will review documentation submitted in support of a procurement to confirm that elected officials did not change rankings or unduly influence the evaluation committee. It is allowable for an elected official to serve on an evaluation committee. An evaluation committee can be used to shortlist or identify the top 3 to 5 proposals. The CDBG procurement policy must be followed in such instances. Remember that ranking establishes the order of consideration for professional services covered by the Consultants Competitive Negotiation Act. If negotiations do not result in an agreement with the top-ranked firm, that firm must be rejected and the next highest-ranked firm selected for negotiations. If, during its review, Commerce determines that the procurement did not comply with federal code, state statutes, or admin rule, local government will be advised of possible corrective action that may be taken, or the local government may elect to use leverage funds to pay for the service. A price or cost analysis must be conducted with each procurement. A price analysis is done if price was an evaluation factor. A price analysis gives consideration to other prices for comparison. For instance, the lowest price bid by respondents to a request for a proposal for administrative services would receive the highest score for price. The other proposers would receive a lower score for price. In all instances where no price were obtained or where there was only a single respondent, a cost analysis must be performed. A cost analysis must include labor hours and cost, indirect costs, expenses, and profit, and a cost analysis must be performed by someone qualified to do so. Local government employees, officers or agents, members of their immediate families, their partners, or people about to be employed by a proposer may not participate in the procurement process at any level. It is not possible to waive a conflict of interest. The only thing that can be done is to disclose the conflict and step aside. If a conflict of interest is discovered after the fact, Commerce will disallow all costs incurred to date relative to the conflict. At this time, Sharita will continue with readiness to proceed requirements.
Okay. In order to qualify for readiness to proceed points, the application must contain a letter from an engineer or an architect who prepared the construction plans and specifications. It should be addressed to the chief elected officer of the local government. It should be certifying that the signed, sealed, and dated plans and specifications are complete, and that the bid documentation, including plans and specifications provided with the application, contains all the required information needed to advertise for bids, except the Davis-Bacon wage decisions, the supplemental CDBG terms and conditions, and the local government's list of certified minority and women business-owned enterprises. The letter must certify that all permits required to initiate construction have been submitted to the required agencies, or that the only required permitting agency is the applicant's local government. If no permits are required for the project, the letter must certify to that effect. The application must also contain a signed and sealed copy of the plans and specifications, plus all necessary bid documents, with the exception of the Davis-Bacon wage decision, the local government's list of certified minority and women business-owned enterprises, and the CDBG supplemental terms and conditions, which must be added prior to advertising for bids. The application must include receipts from the United States Postal Service or other delivery service sufficient to confirm that our required infrastructure permit applications were submitted prior to the submission of the application to Florida Commerce. An email or letter from the permitting agency or agencies confirming that the application was received is also considered acceptable documentation for purposes of scoring readiness to proceed points. Some deficiencies in the readiness to proceed submissions may be cured if documentation is provided prior to the end of the completeness period that verifies the plans and specifications were completed and all permits were applied for prior to the application deadline. If not verified during the completeness period, points claimed for readiness to proceed will be disallowed. This slide represents a sample of language to be used to certify for readiness to proceed points. Okay. The next slide provides a further example of the requisite certifications required for readiness to proceed. Okay. On this slide, this is an excerpt from a sample letter which presents an example of an engineer certification regarding permits where only one permit is required. Our next slide offers an example of a certification where the permits have already been received. And this slide offers an example of certification that appears to be contradicted by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection which implies that more permits may be required. If that turns out to be the case, readiness to proceed points may be disallowed, and the application's ability to score high enough to receive an award may be affected. This slide offers an example of a certification where the permits will be issued by the applicant's local government. And at this time, Graham Mercurian will discuss economic development and its requirements.
Under the economic development category, eligible activities include the construction of public infrastructure in support of a business. Public infrastructure is a broad term and may include the paving of streets, the installation of sewer lines, or the relocation of utilities. However, construction under the economic development category must be limited to the minimum public improvements needed to create or retain full-time equivalent jobs. Each economic development application must comply with HUD's public benefit standard and satisfy the low to moderate income jobs national objective. This national objective requires that one full-time equivalent position be created or retained for every $35,000 in CDBG funding provided. It also requires that at least 51% of all jobs created or retained be made available to people who are low to moderate income. Some reminders for economic development applications include that applications received during an application cycle are competitive and are ranked and prioritized for funding based on their score. If the total of all economic development funding set aside for economic development applications do not exceed the amount of funding that has been reserved for them, the remaining funds may be made available for reservation on a first-come, first-served basis after the closing of an application cycle. Applicants for economic development funding must demonstrate that the proposed project location is properly zoned at the time the application is submitted. Additionally, in accordance with Section 290 Florida statutes, Florida Commerce's review of the economic development application includes confirming zoning to confirm that the proposed use of the project location is consistent with each local government's comprehensive plan. An award of funds under the economic development category is not allowable if there's no job creator committed to the project, and the job creator must be identified in the application as a participating party. The project must be located in a non-entitlement community. Again, those are communities under municipalities under 50,000 people, counties under 200,000 people, and an underwriting analysis is required for startups and loans. The application narrative for an economic development project must include such information as the roles of all parties whose action or participation are necessary for the project's success. It must also clearly state the number and types of jobs to be created or retained. The narrative must include a description of any additional development, spin-off jobs, and the need for additional goods and or services that are likely to be stimulated as a result of this project. The narrative must also clearly describe the proposed activities to be funded through the CDBG program, as well as any activities to be funded by the participating party or any other source. The project narrative must also describe any anticipated increases to the tax base that may be likely to occur, including property, sales, and any other taxes. It's important to remember that jobs retained for low to moderate income persons are jobs that generally require only a high school education. If additional training is required, the narrative must clearly describe the anticipated training needs for low to moderate income persons and how or who will provide that training. And finally, the narrative must describe the cost per job created or retained will be less than $35,000 in CDBG funds on a per job basis. Supporting documentation that must be included in the application includes a local government letter of commitment as described in Part 5 of the Economic Development Application Instructions, an engineer's project cost estimate, and a certification of the minimum infrastructure requirements needed. If multiple jurisdictional activity is expected, such as the cooperation between a city and a county government, you must also submit copies of any interlocal agreements. Documentation stating that the applicant has committed leveraged funds to the project must be provided, and a copy of the comprehensive plan and any relevant excerpts must be provided so that we can check for conformance. Lastly, jurisdiction, project area, and floodplain map must be provided with each application. As noted in the previous slide, 3 maps, including the jurisdiction map, project area map, and a floodplain map, must be included in the application for funding, and copies of each of those maps are available on this slide. The application must incorporate supporting documentation provided by the participating party or job creator. The application must also include a letter of commitment, including all 5 elements listed in Part 5 of the Economic Development Instructions section of the application. It must also include documentation of site control for the project, as in terms of the actual area that will be creating jobs, and financial information for the past 2 fiscal years, including a balance sheet and income statement from the job creator. In addition to these items, additional required documentation includes a detailed cost estimate of the participating party's private investment activities related to this project. The participating party must also submit a business plan in outline format, including a description of the planned business, its marketing plan, a description of its competitors and management plan for the proposed business operations, a schedule for the undertaking of any construction-related business facilities, and an assessment of any risks involved with the planned business operations. An applicant under the Economic Development Program category can lose their funding reservation if all required documentation is not submitted in accordance with the application instructions, or if that information is not readily available at the site visit in accordance with our standard site visit requirements. The funding reservation can also be lost if the applicant fails to provide requested documentation and executed copies of a CDBG subgrant or participating party agreement within 60 days after the offer to contract letter is issued by Florida Commerce. Awards made under the Economic Development Program category are subject to financial consequences if certain national objective requirements are not met, including the failure to create the minimum number of jobs committed to in the application, of which at least 51% must be offered to low to moderate income persons at a cost per job created of not more than $34,999 per person. So now I'll hand our presentation back to Sharita Jackson, who will close us up.
Well, this concludes our presentation. If you have any questions, we encourage you to please type them in the chat feature. We'll take a few minutes to allow you to submit any additional questions and review any questions that were submitted during the presentation. We'll be back to answer your questions in just a moment.
Hi, everyone. This is Pam. While we're waiting for folks to put any more questions in the chat, and the team is sort of gathering answers, I just wanted to remind everyone, I know there was a few people that joined the webinar a little late, and we did have a slide or two at the beginning about the emergency order that talks about some of the changes in this cycle. So I encourage you to go to our website and pull, that emergency order is posted there so you can see what that's about. And of course, let us know if you have any questions. And then also just to be sure that a lot of our rejection issues often have to do with the citizen participation requirements and the national objective. I think those are like 2 of the main kind of issues that we run into sometimes. So just pay really close attention to those requirements. And if you have any questions at all, give us a call, and we can look at examples with you or help you make sure that you're meeting the documentation requirements for those things. Thanks.
Thank you again for participating today. We had a few questions in the chat. So we'll start with the first one, asking, will you describe the difference between a fair housing workshop and a fair housing activity? So a fair housing workshop is a formally noticed event that occurs to notify the public of their rights related to fair housing, and it's documented with an affidavit of publication, sign-in sheets, any handouts that are provided. On the other hand, a fair housing activity is a kind of broader term and refers to almost an activity that actually affirmatively furthers fair housing. So that's our difference between those two. Okay.
We received another question related to draft meeting minutes, which is kind of a common application question. So the question is, if draft meeting minutes are not available before the grant deadline, will submission of the second public hearing agenda suffice or certified meeting until certified meeting minutes are available? If you do not have certified meeting minutes, we'd ask that you submit us the draft meeting minutes for us to review, but we do have to receive certified meeting minutes prior to making an award for any project. Our third question is related to the emergency order, and our Bureau Chief Pam Portwood provided a written response in the chat. It's a little long, so you folks are welcome to read through it. We will provide a link to the webinar. It'll be made available on our website. Is our next question. And with regard to whether, so there's a question about whether county funds for professional services can be counted towards the matching requirement for CDBG purposes. The answer is yes. Any local government is welcome to use their own, continuing service contract if they're paying for it themselves. What you'd be required to do is to formally commit that funding in a resolution, include a copy of that resolution, and then in your project narrative specify that the leveraged funding that is committed in your resolution is being used for a professional service contract, so that we have an understanding of where and how that funding is allocated. The last question we have is whether the department will be providing an amount set aside for each of the 4 funding categories. Our normal administrative rules have been waived for certain things. We generally do have a set aside for each category, but it's not something we've determined yet. And those are all the questions that we have in our chat. So we can take another couple minutes in case anybody would like to put a question in the chat. Otherwise, Otherwise, our contact information is available on this slide on the screen now. If you folks have any additional questions, please email us at cdbg@floridacommerce.fl.gov. And please, if you have any questions or want any specific technical assistance, reach out to any of us here on this panel, or you can reach out to the email address that is on the slide, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
Thank you for your participation today.